What is up, everyone? Welcome to another interview on the Venue RX podcast. And I am excited for today's interview because we are handling a topic that I think is very, very important in today's wedding and event world, and something that I feel like we all need to be spending some time thinking about, even if it's not necessarily at the top of your list. And so today I have the pleasure of interviewing Brittany Dry. Brittany, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me on. Excited to chat today.
We are here at the Venue RX. We're focused on helping wedding pros level up their businesses. And specifically from the venue perspective, I'm excited to be able to bring this type of content to people and talk to professionals like yourself. You have an online publication and blog called Love Inc., correct?
Yes. Loving Magazine, we launched in 2013, and it is an equality-minded wedding publication. So that means that we create content that's targeted to both hetero and LGBTQ plus couples, inclusive content with gender-neutral language, content that is for both LGBTQ plus and hetero. I kind of found that when I launched it, no one was really being truly inclusive with their content. Media was either talking to a bride and groom, or it was strictly just for LGBTQ plus. And so I saw a void in the industry needing just truly inclusive, equal representation of both hetero and LGBTQ. So that is kind of what inspired me to launch Love Inc. And we are a blog, we are a print publication, we're a podcast, or we're doing all the things now.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, just before we got on the show, we were talking here about podcasting, and I'm really excited about, checking out your podcast as you're recording more and releasing more here. I know you said you have 3 babies now, correct?
Yes. I have a almost 4-year-old and 8-month-old twins, boy-girl twins.
Wow. So your hands are full. And I know
Got my hands
as a
full.
parent, as a business owner myself, it's definitely sometimes challenging to do all of the things, but that's really inspiring to see you bringing this resource to the community. I would love to take this whole podcast and really, really take it in an educational direction, because, I'd like to think that I was sensitive in the messaging to LGBTQ plus, clients that we've had in the past, couples that we've been able to serve, and I think that many pros, I should say, are, maybe if they are making mistakes in the verbiage and what they're posting, they may not be aware of them.
Right.
And so I think education is a huge, huge consideration here. And I'd also really like to kind of go on this journey with you and understanding, how do we use language and images that are more inclusive? How are we kind of true to ourselves, maybe in our religious backgrounds, yet also inclusive? There's a lot going on there. And I think especially in today's world, where these issues are in our face and we need to deal with them, I think that this type of topic is really, really important. So are you okay with me asking you some hard questions?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Education, as you mentioned, like it's so important because in the wedding industry is just very heteronormative. It is rooted in hetero traditions.
Mhm.
And so wedding pros, even if they are the most, biggest ally in their heart, our minds have been thinking in bride and groom terms for so long. It's ingrained into our brains, right? So we have to really retrain the way we think and the way that we communicate with clients to be using inclusive language and having that, equality minded mindset. And it takes practice and it takes education. So excited to dive into that with you today.
Definitely. Let's jump right in. And actually, before we do that, I'm curious, how did you get started with this? Because this is it's, like I said, very needed, very necessary, but it's definitely something that I feel like you have to have some sort of connection to really target and focus on this. So how did you get involved? Why the wedding and event industry of all industries? Kind of take us back a little bit and give us an origin story.
Yeah. So I mean, I identify as cisgender hetero. So I get asked this question a lot, like, why do you care so much? And for me, like, I've always been a huge advocate for the LGBTQ community. And I have also always been, an editor in the editorial space, an editor, a writer. And when, um, I saw this void in the industry, prior to Love Inc., I was a writer and editor for a few different publications, mostly like wedding blogs. And that's kind of how I dipped my toe into the wedding editorial space. And that's where I saw this massive void that needed to be filled of, you know, people marketing to the bride and groom, media talking to the bride and groom. And I wanted to fill that space because I felt it was important. I felt it was needed. I felt it was time. Um, the world was ready. The wedding space was ready to be truly inclusive. And so that's kind of why and how I got started with Love Inc. And it's just, at the time I was hoping, we're 8 years in, like I was hoping it'd be a moot point, we'd just be a normal like wedding publication now. And while we have certainly seen, um, efforts increased across other media and other publications, other wedding pro marketing, we've definitely seen, more inclusivity, but there's still a long, long way to go. And there's still education that needs to be done, and content that still requires that inclusive lens. It's unfortunately still not quite there yet. It's still not quite the norm. So it's Love Inc. is still a very niche publication. It's has a very niche audience, which I'm more than proud to serve.
Absolutely. I want to ask you about the efforts of other publications and other prominent figures in the wedding and events space. I mean, think about the education that comes out from the Knot and Wedding Wire, from any of the different, blogs, the other ones out there, right? Not Love Inc., obviously, but do you feel like sometimes that the efforts to align themselves with the LGBTQ plus community, or um, you know anything in the whole like gender, race, like that whole thing, do you feel like some of these efforts are like token efforts just to kind of make them seem like they're following along with the times and it's not genuine?
That's a great question. I think like this past summer with the Black Lives Matter movement, a lot of performative actions happened. But we have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And if that means, a publication is called out for their lack of inclusivity or lack of effort, and they start doing it from there, at least as long as they continue that effort, as long as they continue that education for themselves, then, like I said, we have to start somewhere. So, I mean, I've worked actually closely with the Knot on their inclusive efforts. I've been doing that for several years now, creating inclusive content for them, and speaking at some of their wedding pro workshops on inclusivity. And I know like that company has always valued it. So it's really nice seeing a large media company value inclusivity in that way. Other publications, I think it goes back to, it's bride and groom. It's always been bride and groom, and it's really hard for them to change that. They feature same-sex couples, but they're still talking to the bride and the content. So I think it's it's a journey, and it takes continuing conversations about it. And if it means, starting from, whether we're talking about race or identity or orientation, if it starts from, a bandwagon effort, as long as it continues and as long as it's, truly genuine, then, I'm all for it. Like, we have to evolve. And if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. Um, but hopefully they are not just throwing up a picture of a same-sex couple during June and calling it a day. Hopefully their equality-minded efforts are extending into the language, the imagery, staff training, giving back to the community and donating and supporting organizations and causes for the fight. Hopefully it's, more than just a picture to them.
Totally, totally. I think that's a really good point. The more than a picture part, right? Like, it's so easy. And I certainly think we saw this with the whole Black Lives Matter movement of people just kind of putting the black square up. And it's like, we've never seen anything from this brand or this influencer before, but now all of a sudden they're a huge supporter because it's trending.
Right.
And it's like, that's not helpful. But I like what you said about, you got to start somewhere. And so even if there is this kind of push and this support, maybe we are moving in the right direction, even if it's not necessarily the right way. We're getting there. We're trying to go there.
Right.
I like what you said also about how the wedding and event space has been, generationally and kind of traditionally focused around bride and groom, right? And when you have that, I think that you kind of have to look historically and see, weddings traditionally were these religious type ceremonies, and so many different religions are not favorable to LGBTQ communities. And so I bring that up, and I think this is a really tough topic, an interesting topic, because when you have a religious, whether that's Christian, whether that's Muslim, whether that's Hindu, Indian, whatever it is, right? When you have a tradition like that has been going on for thousands of years, and you are trying to break those norms, I guess my big question is, how can someone who really wants to be inclusive,
Mm-hmm.
how can they still hang on to some of those religious traditions? It's this really like tough thing. And I feel like a lot of folks struggle with that. So what insight do you have for us on that?
Well, I mean, for couples, if religion is important to you, and if sadly that religion is not supportive of your love, like let's take Catholicism, for instance, um, you can still, if it's important to you, you can still include readings, into your ceremony. Certain traditions, ceremonial traditions, you can certainly, still nod to it, because I think, it should be reflective of the couple, and it should be about the couple. And if that is important to the couple and that's what they want, then they shouldn't shy away from it, if that's what's going to make their ceremony complete.
Mhm.
Um, can they get married in a Catholic church? They're going to probably have to refocus, their venue choice, but incorporating, like I said, like readings, or other traditions, whatever the religion may lend itself to, they can certainly still do that and still honor that interest of theirs, and that part of their lives. So,
And I promise I'm asking you the hard questions first, and then we're going to get to some more of the education stuff. But what about for the business owners? I know like there's obviously widely publicized kind of obvious cases like the bakery in Colorado, and different things where there have been businesses that haven't been comfortable aligning themselves. And like you said, as far as a supportive effort, when you're donating to organizations that are supporting equality in these ways, what is your advice for someone, say they're listening to this right now and they don't necessarily, because of religious beliefs, they aren't aligned, right? But they don't want to be, they don't have any hate. They're not trying to be antagonistic, but they yet don't feel comfortable adopting those same values. Do you have some advice for them? Like what does a business do in this case?
I mean, no one's going to, if you are a vendor and you do not believe two people should get married because of who they are and or who they love, um, an LGBTQ plus couple, that's not fair to them to work with you. Like if you are not there to celebrate their love, like why would they want to work with someone like that? I think it's important to do a deep reflection of yourself and your values, and ask yourself why you think that, why you believe that, and do some education and read some human stories. I think people use religion a lot as just this card that they put down that is just over encompassing without realizing that there are people and people's lives behind it. And um, I don't want to like get too much into religion, but people tend to cherry pick what works for them and their narrative with religion.
So
And
true.
so, you know, like, is it okay for you, why is it okay for you to do some things that are against the Bible, for instance, but not this? And I think it's really important to like reevaluate your own beliefs. Um, there are plenty of Christians and other religious people who do support equality and support marriage equality and love between two people of the same sex. And they can, you know, religion, and in their narrative, religion supports it. So, you know, the whole homophobia, for instance, homophobic, that's not even a word in the Bible. And people use that as like this term in the Bible that says that, a man cannot be with another man. Um, I'm not a religion expert, so I don't want to like, get into it too much, but I think it's really important for you to see it as humans and not just writing it off because someone in a religion told you it's not allowed.
Totally. And I think I'm glad we're talking about this because I think this is something, obviously Christianity is maybe more of the dominant religion here in the United States, but certainly throughout the world, with Islam, with some of these different, Islam, I think is something supposed to be like a third of the world, and as far as I understand, they're not friendly or inclusive to marriage equality. And so when you think about that, when you think about it's a tough thing when you think about either couples or businesses on either side of this and the religious beliefs that go along with both of them. It's a tough thing to reconcile for sure. And so I think more conversations, more like open conversations without a bias,
Mhm.
right, need to happen. You're doubtless going to have a bias, but just being willing to come to the table and discuss these issues without antagonism, I think.
Right.
And I feel like we've seen a lot of antagonism in the world around this because emotions are high, traditions are at stake, but lives are at stake. Like there's these two kind of different things that are going back and forth. So let's talk about language, I think, because I think language is kind of this normative thing that we've is just baked in, bride and groom, like you were saying. Let's kind of take the religious piece off the table, right? And for a venue, let's just talk venue specifically. I guess this is cross applicable though to other vendors. What ways can they start being more inclusive with their language?
Well, venues specifically, a big one is bridal suite.
Okay.
So the term bridal suite is very gendered. And I always encourage venues to, at the very least, change the name from a bridal suite to something more gender neutral, getting ready room, prep suite, wedding suite, something along those terms that, so if two grooms were doing a venue tour, it's like, here's our bridal suite. And it's just like, well, there's no bride here.
Mhm.
So that's a big one for venues. And those rooms also tend to be, you have two getting ready rooms. One tends to be larger than the other because one is for the quote unquote bride who has hair and makeup. So if you're able to, if you're, obviously this is a structural thing, but if you're going through renovations or if you're building a venue, it's really important to have two equally sized getting ready rooms that are of unisex design so that you don't have one that is decorated, in more feminine colors and one with, masculine leather bound books and, dark colors,
Typically kind of these
rich
gendered
mahogany.
images. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, so with that, then, do you think because it is a structural concern, and I know for my venue owner listeners, who they spend a lot of money, they take a lot of care into the design of things, and a lot of times, even if they don't have suites on site for couples to get ready in, they are considering this. Maybe they're like,
Mhm.
oh, if I added, some getting ready areas, this is going to be good.
Yeah.
But then when they think about what to do, either from a decor perspective or from a structural perspective, to your point, they're going to be making some monetary decisions. How do you feel that plays in, takes into account if they aren't really serving? Like maybe they get, one same-sex couple for every 20, different sex couples, hetero couples. How what is there a go-between that they, if they're spending $100,000 on this project, is there a go-between where they don't kind of exclude their hetero couples, which they're serving more of?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's excluding by having equally sized rooms and or unisex design. It's just kind of, making these options available to anyone and everyone. And I will say that younger millennials, Gen Z, these things are important to them, even hetero couples. Whether they have friends in the wedding party who are LGBTQ plus and or they have a mixed gender wedding party, um, they are looking for things like this because they want to spend their dollars with businesses that take this into consideration, that align with their own values. It's not just about the talent or in the venue, you know talking venues. It's not just about the space, it's about the business, it's about the brand. Does that brand align with their values and support things that they do? These things are very, very important to the younger generations that are the future, the future of the industry, your potential clients. And I think it's worth the investment, to appease them and to be truly inclusive and an equality minded vendor.
Totally. I think it's a really, really good perspective. When thinking about different parts of the country, right? Because with venues, with vendors at different parts of the country, there may be more of a um, traditionally, and I'll say traditionally conservative environment. When a business owner is thinking about making these decisions, do you think it is um, fair or realistic, maybe, depending on where you are in the country, to do this without losing business, or should that not even be a consideration because of what's at stake here?
I think it's you should do it. Like if you're losing business because you are trying to be inclusive, then are those the type of clients that you want? Um, and like I said, with the younger generations, like inclusivity is in them. Like it's part of how they grew up and it's important to them. So, you don't have quite as much backlash with the younger generation as you would with, you know, even older than millennials. If you did service like a baby, a boomer generation, that's a different conversation. And I think it's, then yes, you might receive backlash and you have to obviously, do what makes sense for your business. So I am always for going the inclusivity route.
Totally.
But it's, this is something that I think it's not going to go away and it's only going to get more so.
Totally. Yeah. I think it's an interesting place to be in the world and just timing right now, because you do have, I think, this boomer generation that didn't have those options and wasn't as educated about all of this. Now we have these newer generations that are coming up and they are expecting it. They are, looking for that, to your point, like you said. But then a lot of times you have the boomers who are paying for some of it, right? And who are helping. So we're in this interesting mix time where the dollar flow may not always be coming from the
Mhm.
couples, but yet the values are there for the couples. The values are different for the boomers, but they're paying, right? So education seems to be really, really important, again, to like not
Yeah.
only what we're doing here, but also the different venues.
And I think
Um,
it's important to say like what's the harm? What's the harm of having two equally sized getting ready rooms? What's the harm in calling it a getting ready room or a prep suite? Like there's no, someone's not going to not book your venue because it's not called a bridal suite. And
Mhm.
if they really want to call it a bridal suite themselves, like by all means, like let them call it a bridal suite. Change the contract for them if it's that important to them. But no one's going to say, wow, I don't want to sign on the dotted line of this venue because they don't call their room a bridal suite. So there's no harm in doing it, but there could be
There's no
harm.
downside, but there's huge upside.
Right,
I totally
exactly.
understand. Definitely. So with other things, what other blind spots do we have as venue owners, as wedding operators? You said the bridal suite, right? Getting ready room,
Getting
wedding
ready room.
suite, things like that. And I guess that would go for the groom suite as well,
Right.
right? So any specific gender terms like that, what do you think about? Are there other blind spots that maybe we are missing?
I always also recommend for venues specifically gender neutral bathrooms,
Okay.
because if the couple themselves aren't LGBTQ plus, they may very well have guests who are, and they, you know, whether they fall, wherever they fall on the spectrum, on the gender identity spectrum, you want to make sure that they are comfortable. And so bathrooms are a huge space that do feel unsafe for those, particularly in the transgender community. So I always recommend gender neutral bathrooms. Also, another place that I see a lot with venues is their recommendation list. A lot of couples go by those venue recommendation lists to find their vendor team. And it's really, really important to have this equality minded conversation with every single vendor on your list. Because if you were to have an LGBTQ plus couple, heaven forbid you give them a list of floral designers to work with and they're refused service.
Mm.
It still happens. People may not realize it happens, but it still very much happens. I, for Love Inc., because we do feature hetero weddings, I personally reach out to every single vendor before publishing a wedding or a style shoot to confirm their equality mindedness. So I'm seeing, more than I would like to see these responses back saying, no, I do not work with same sex couples. And not even, I'm not even talking like rural America. I'm talking in the Northeast, in big cities, San Francisco, Portland, places that you even want to like assume are progressive. You still have these pockets of people who are discriminating against LGBTQ plus couples.
Mhm.
So it's really important to not assume that everyone is, even if you are in a big city, and have these conversations with vendors from your vendor list. And I recommend, if they are not, remove them from your vendor list. Do you want to send clients to some, even if they're hetero clients, like I said, these things are important to straight couples too,
Mhm.
um, to vendors who are not inclusive. So you really have to reevaluate that. And, while like I know
Are
this isn't on, diversity as a whole, but I also recommend venues make those lists diverse, get some BIPOC vendors on there. Um, you know, I think it's a huge conversation. And it's one of those things that I see way too often of, you know, vendor list, vendor recommendation lists from venues having just all white, hetero, cisgender vendors on there. And we want to really support those marginalized communities.
Mhm. I like what you said earlier about kind of doing some soul searching or value evaluating, maybe, because I can't help but thinking when looking at this, if you're talking to a vendor, like you said, you reach out to the vendor and they're like, oh no, I don't work with same-sex couples. It's doubtless based off of religion,
Mhm.
tradition, beliefs, values, whatever it is, right? And so they maybe aren't wrong, right? Because they are entitled to their opinion, but you're just recommending for vendors that they don't work with those categories of people because that is just by their existence marginalizing this other community.
Yeah, and it's also, when you work with people in an event, you're associating yourself with them. And is that the kind of person, is that the kind of business that you would want associated with your own brand and your own business? Someone that discriminates against an entire demographic.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, I would assume the answer would be, no, but
Yeah. And yeah, exactly. Depending on who you ask, they would be like very strongly plant their flag in the ground about, whatever it is. And it's interesting. I think we jumped directly into, and I'm glad you brought up, the whole BIPOC community, because we immediately jumped in when talking about exclusivity, or inclusivity rather. We talked about, the LGBTQ plus community. We went there right away, but I do think we're really seeing as a whole, there are marginalized communities that we can do a better job of serving.
absolutely.
Are there other things that we could be considering? I mean, I think of right away, the biggest one that has seemed to not be an issue at all is ADA, right?
Mhm.
Like there are special walkways, there are literally structural things that serve a community of folks who are disabled. And so you're championing that same type of accoutrements, design, structural elements for these other communities that could potentially and are being marginalized. Are there other things outside of that that we should be looking for, even style things, comfortability things for folks? Like, I mean, there's so many different, I think, triggering things or hurtful things. You don't necessarily have to be in the LGBTQ community or in the BIPOC community. Like you can be affected by stuff in a venue outside of that. Are there other things that venues maybe specifically could be looking at to help create more of an inclusive venue?
Yeah, I mean, well, you brought up, ableism, and advocating for that. I think, actually just an article on this, just published an article on it, on creating safe spaces for neurodiverse individuals, to step away from, people who have, social anxiety, or, all these varying conditions, to have a safe space for them that is away from the event, and that they can kind of center themselves and have a moment, as needed. I think is also like, talking a venue specifically is a great, way to showcase inclusivity and to kind of offer that to, clients.
Totally. Um, can it I think, like you were saying, it starts with the language, it starts with the mindset, it starts with really, thinking about your own beliefs and values, and then kind of letting those flow through, so you aren't just
Mhm.
trying to piggyback off of a cultural movement, but it's actually truly a part of who you are and what your organization stands for. um, Talking about, I'm really curious about some of those things, because I think we have vendors who are listening right now who might have learned some things, right? The wedding suites, right? That's a big one. Bathrooms are huge. Are there other structural things that we can be looking at? We just talked about, safe spaces that maybe, what was the term that you used? Because I haven't heard that term for
Neurodiverse.
neurodiverse. Okay, excellent. And you said you just posted an article about that?
Yeah, yeah, I can like send it to you if you want to put it in the show notes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a great writer do very extensive research on this and interviewed some great experts on the piece. And it's really, it showcases like what you can do as a venue to, create a space for guests to kind of have, you know, have to center themselves. So
Are, for those vendors who are listening right now, they want to be inclusive, but then they also want to, um, they're struggling with how much time to spend on pursuing these inclusive pursuits. Is there a kind of a pathway that you'd recommend that they start on? Because it seems like there really are so many different opportunities to create more of an inclusive venue, and you could really spend a lot of money and spend a lot of time creating this, and it sounds like that's going to actually mean something to these couples that are coming in, which is incredible. But is there, in your opinion and your research, kind of a pathway that they can follow, so that they, because they also have to build their businesses, they have to make sure their branding's right, their marketing, I mean, there's like so much to do,
sure.
and they might be feeling overwhelmed, like, oh,
Yeah,
what do
no,
I
it's a
do?
lot. It's a lot. And my advice is always like, just getting started, adjust your language. Go
Mhm.
through all your contracts, your documentation, contact forms, go through the steps that potential clients go through, and just really give it an audit to
Mhm.
see if you're using gender driven language. So that is any inquiry forms that come through from your website, any auto response emails that get sent out, any questionnaires that you send out, contracts, documents, post event questionnaires, ensure that all of the language on your website and your social media is inclusive. That's like, if you're going to take a first step, like that's the step to take, and make sure all your marketing messaging is inclusive. That is one of the simplest things that you can do that like makes the most impact and makes, it really like allows people to, see them, use imagery if you can, see themselves in the imagery, see their love in the imagery. And it's an easy fix. You just have to really like just buckle down and do it. Or call me. I consult. I do it. I do it for vendors. Because it makes a big difference. It really does. If you are a same-sex couple, no one wants to, take turns signing on the bride's line.
Yeah. Totally. Totally. That makes a lot of sense. Well, Brittany, you mentioned contacting you and getting a hold of you. And I think for venues and vendors that are really committed to this and really want to just make sure that they are being as inclusive as possible, you would be an incredible resource. And there may be people, in their community, maybe even, but starting with you, and maybe even there's places that you can refer them to if it's too much. But where do people get a hold of you? How can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my site's loveincmag.com, and I'm at loveincmag across all social media platforms. You can email me at bdry@loveincmag.com, or direct message me on any social platform. I'm most often on Instagram. So
Awesome. Well, Brittany, I really appreciate you coming on the show, talking about some of these tough issues. It's something I think that now more than ever we need to be talking about. The conversation's important, kind of challenging what we've just assumed, right? And so I really appreciate you coming on and doing this for the community. I think it definitely means a lot. So thank you for being on the show today.
thank you so much for having me.